You ever wonder how governments make these massive, multi-billion-dollar decisions that affect pretty much everything we do? Like, how our cell service actually works. Well, what if they could test those decisions in a simulator before they went live and cost us billions? Okay, let's dive into this incredible story about a team of researchers who built exactly that.
So if you just look at the top-line number, Canada's digital infrastructure seems to be in great shape. Over 93% of Canadians have access to the latest 5G networks. I mean, that's a huge number. You'd think pretty much everyone is connected, right? But that number, well, it hides a much more complicated and honestly, a much starker reality.
Because when you dig just a little bit deeper, that number absolutely plummets to just 47% for Canadians living on First Nations reserves, and folks in rural areas aren't doing much better. This isn't just a small gap in service, it's a chasm. This is the digital divide staring us right in the face through two completely different numbers.
So this is the big question, right? How can you actually design policies that are meant to and can effectively close this divide for good? It's a huge challenge, for sure. But the answer might actually be hiding in a place you'd probably never expect: the super complex, high-stakes world of government auctions.
All right, let's talk about the invisible real estate that powers our phones, our internet, our entire connected future. We're talking about radio spectrum. And the way governments sell off pieces of this invisible property is through these massive, high-stakes auctions.
Now, a spectrum auction isn't just some sale. It is the fundamental mechanism that decides which companies get to offer you service, what kind of service you're going to get, and how much competition there will actually be in the market. The results of one of these auctions can have consequences that ripple out for decades.
And wow, are they lucrative! Canada's latest big auction brought in more than $2 billion for the government. That's great, of course, but it brings up a really critical question. Should the main goal just be to make the most money possible? Or could these auctions be designed to do something more? Like actually helping to connect those underserved communities we were just talking about.
So what's really fascinating is how these auctions actually run. It's something called a clock auction. It starts with a pretty low price, and all the companies say how many licenses they want at that price. If more licenses are wanted than are available, the auctioneer raises the price, the clock ticks up, and they go again. This just keeps repeating, round after round, until the number of licenses companies want is exactly the same as the number up for sale.
And this brings us right to the core problem for any government that wants to try something new. If you want to change the rules of a multi-billion-dollar game, say to encourage companies to build out into rural areas, how on earth do you know your new idea is going to work? You can't just run a test auction with real companies and real money. The stakes are just way, way too high. I mean, think about it. You're trying to predict the incredibly complex strategic chess moves of these giant corporations in a situation they have literally never seen before. If you get it wrong, you could crash the whole market, you could scare away investment, or fail to raise the billions of dollars needed for public services. It's a massive, massive gamble.
So economists basically have two main tools in their toolbox for this kind of thing. The first are equilibrium models, which try to map out every single possible strategic move. Sounds perfect, but for something as complicated as a real spectrum auction, they are just computationally impossible to run. The other way is a behavioral model, which looks at what companies actually did in past auctions and uses that real-world data to make smart predictions.
And that behavioral approach is exactly what these researchers did. They decided to build a digital twin of the entire auction. You should think of it like a flight simulator, but instead of training pilots, it's designed to train policymakers. It lets them test drive brand new economic policies in a completely safe virtual environment. The secret sauce to their model was actually its simplicity. Instead of trying to guess every complex, long-term strategy a company might be cooking up, they made a really simple assumption. As they put it, they modeled bidders as myopic and straightforward. All that means is that in any given round, a company just bids on whatever package of licenses gives them the absolute best deal at that moment's prices. No 4D chess, just the best deal right now.
So it really boils down to three core ideas. First, that myopic behavior we just talked about, what's best for me right now. Second, that companies don't consider every single possible combination of licenses, they show up with a pretty limited set of packages they're actually interested in buying. And third, a computer program then works backwards from the real auction data to figure out the minimum value each company must have placed on those licenses to act the way they did.
Okay, but let's be real. An assumption is just an assumption.
It all sounds good in theory, right? The billion-dollar question is still hanging out there. Can a model that's this simple actually predict the outcome of a messy, complex, real-world auction? They had to put it to the test.
And the results? Honestly, they were stunning. When they ran their simulation of the real auction, it predicted the exact final allocation of licenses for 4 of the 5 major telecom companies. Not close. An exact match. The 5th company was just a near miss. This was incredible.
And what about the money? The model predicted the final revenue with 94% accuracy. Just let that sink in for a second. A simple behavioral model predicted who got what and the final $2 billion price tag with near-perfect precision. The digital twin worked. The flight simulator was officially ready for takeoff.
Okay, so this is where it gets really cool. With a model that they knew worked, the researchers could finally ask their big what-if question. What would happen if they rewrote the auction rules to directly reward companies for serving the public good, for actually committing to connect rural and remote Canadians?
The big idea they wanted to test was actually pretty simple, but totally brilliant. They decided to embed deployment commitments, that's a promise to build out your network, directly into the auction rules themselves.
Here's how it would work. When you bid on a license, you don't just bid money, you also choose a deployment level, low, medium, or high. But the real twist is in the pricing. The auction is set up so that the prices for the high deployment licenses go up much more slowly. This creates a really powerful incentive. If you're willing to do more for the public good, you get a better price. Suddenly, it makes good business sense to do the right thing.
So, they took their validated model with the company valuations they'd already figured out, and they ran the simulation again with these new rules. They essentially reran the entire $2 billion auction inside their computer, but this time with a design that was focused on connectivity. And what the simulation spit out was just staggering.
The new auction design would lead to over 3.3 million additional Canadians gaining access to high-speed internet. I mean, that is not a minor adjustment. That is a life-changing leap forward in closing the digital divide, and it was achieved simply by changing the rules of the game.
But you know what's even more powerful? It's who gets connected. The biggest gains, a 13% jump in coverage, happen in remote areas. Rural areas see a 10% increase. The benefits flow to exactly the places that need it the most, directly tackling that disparity we saw at the very beginning of all this.
Now, nothing's free, right? There's always a trade-off. The simulation showed that this massive gain in connectivity would come at the cost of a 16% decrease in government revenue from the auction. But this completely reframes the whole debate. It's not just lost money. It becomes a clear policy choice. It's a direct investment in national infrastructure, traded for a huge, quantifiable public good.
And that really brings us to the biggest idea of all. This wasn't just about spectrum auctions. It's about a whole new way of making policy. If we can build a flight simulator for our digital economy, what else should we be simulating before we launch? Major healthcare reforms? New climate policies? Big changes to the tax code? This research proves we have the tools to test the future, and maybe it's time we started using them.